In the village of Dober, beside a slow, wide river, there lived a woman named Amara. For 12 years, she was the one who warned them. She read the colour of the sky before the rains came wrong. She heard the silence of birds before the sickness came. She knew, always, somehow, before anyone else knew. And for 12 years, they laughed at her. Then, one harvest season, the driest anyone could remember, Amara stopped speaking altogether. Not to the fishermen, not to the elders, not to anyone. And that was the moment the village of Dober should have been afraid. Because in 12 years, Amara had never once been wrong. Nobody in Dober remembered exactly when Amara arrived. Some said she came during the year of the red dust, when the harmattan wind blew so hard it stripped the leaves from the mango trees before their time. Others said she had always simply been there, at the edge of things, the way certain trees seem older than the memory of anyone who claims to have planted them. What was certain was this: she arrived with a woven basket, a single sleeping mat, and no husband's name to introduce her by. In Dober, a woman without a husband's name was a woman without a place. She was not quite a widow, not quite unmarried, not quite anything the village had a word for. So they gave her the only word they had left. They called her the stranger. She built her hut with her own hands near the old baobab at the village's edge, close enough to be counted among them, far enough that no one had to look at her unless they chose to. For a season, she did what was expected of a woman alone. She tended a small garden, she fetched water. She kept her eyes down in the market, though those who looked closely noticed that her eyes were rarely truly down. They were always somewhere else, following the sky or the river or the flight of something only she could see. It was in her second year that Dober first learned what she was. The dry season had been long, and the fishermen were restless. The river had grown thin and lazy, and everyone said the fish would be biting hard on the third full moon when the water finally cooled. Amara came to the riverbank the evening before the fishermen were to take their boats out. She did not shout. She did not perform urgency the way a man might to be taken seriously. She simply stood at the water's edge and said quietly to whoever would listen, "Not tomorrow. Wait 3 days." The men laughed. One of them, a broad-shouldered fisherman named Osse, laughed loudest. "The stranger reads water like an elder reads bones," he said, to the amusement of the others. "Tell me, woman, does the river speak our language, or does it only whisper to those who have no husband to keep them occupied?" Amara did not answer him. She only watched the water a moment longer, then turned and walked back to her hut. 3 boats went out the next morning. A storm rose from nowhere. The kind old men later swore they had never seen in that season, in that stretch of river. 2 boats made it back, battered, their crews shaken and silent. The third did not return at all. 3 men were lost that day, Osse among them. After that, some in the village began to watch Amara differently. Not with warmth. Dobar was not a place quick to offer warmth to a woman with no name, but with a kind of wary attention, the way one watches a fire that has already proven it can burn. What followed were 12 years in which Amara was right more times than the village could comfortably count, and wrong not even once. She warned the farmers not to plant near the low fields the year the rains came twice as heavy as any year before, and those who listened kept their yams, while those who didn't watched them rot beneath standing water. She warned an old woman not to let her grandson wander past the tall grass during the dry months, when the grass hid things that did not want to be found by small, curious feet. The grandmother listened. Others, hearing the same warning second-hand, did not pass it to their own children. 2 seasons later, a different family buried a son who had wandered exactly there. She warned of a sickness before it had a name, 3 full weeks before the first fever broke out in the eastern huts, giving those who trusted her time to boil their water and separate their sick from their well. Those who dismissed her lost more than their share of the village's children that season. Each time the pattern repeated. Amara spoke. Some listened quietly, almost in secret, as if believing her were itself a kind of shame. Most did not. And when her words proved true, the village found new ways to unsee what had happened in front of them. Luck, they said, the first few times. Coincidence, they said, when luck no longer explained it. Witchcraft, a few began to whisper, though never within her hearing, because there is a particular kind of village silence, the polite kind, the kind that smiles at your face, that Dobar had long since perfected around Amara. The chief himself, an aging man named Baba Fawasanya, quietly began sending a servant to sit near Amara's hut during planting season, to note whatever the stranger might say about the coming weather, without ever admitting to anyone, least of all himself, that he did this. But his son, Tunde, was of a different temperament entirely. Where his father had learned, slowly, a private and unspoken respect, Tunde had inherited only his father's pride, none of his father's caution. "The witch talks to herself in the market again," Tunde would say, loud enough to be heard whenever Amara passed. Perhaps the ancestors have finally grown tired of her voice, and that is why no husband ever wanted it. The other young men laughed with him, the easy laughter of those who have never once had to be right about anything that mattered. Amara never answered him. Not once in 12 years. She only continued to watch the sky, and the river, and the flight of birds that only she seemed able to read. And she continued to speak, when speaking was needed, to whoever still chose to listen. It was during these years that a child began coming to her hut each morning. A girl named Ifeoma, no older than 6 when she first arrived, sent by a mother too busy to fetch water herself, and unbothered, unlike most of Dobar, by rumours of witchcraft. Ifeoma was the only person in the village who had never once laughed at Amara. She was, Amara would later think, the only person in Dobar who had never decided, in advance, what kind of person a woman like her was allowed to be. By the 12th year, Ifeoma was no longer a small child, though she still came each morning, from habit as much as duty. And by the 12th year, something in Amara had begun, quietly, to break. It was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of 12 years of funerals that need not have happened. 12 years of watching a village choose its own pride over its own children. 12 years of being right in a way that cost her nothing but the respect she had never truly been offered in the first place. That harvest season arrived dry. Drier than any Amara had seen since the year of the red dust that some claimed had brought her to Dober in the first place. The elders spoke of it as a blessing, an easy season for the grain stores, nothing more. Amara watched the horizon each evening, the way she always had. And what she read there frightened her in a way the fisherman's storm, all those years ago, never had. She did not tell anyone, Not the fishermen preparing their nets, not the farmers already celebrating an easy harvest. Not even Ifeoma, who noticed, because Ifeoma had spent enough mornings in that hut to notice everything, that something had changed in the older woman's face. "You've seen something," Ifeoma said one morning, setting down the water jar. It was not a question. Amara did not answer. "You always tell them, even when they laugh, even when they call you—" Ifeoma stopped herself, but they both knew the word she'd swallowed. Still, Amara said nothing. Days passed this way, then a full week. The village noticed the silence before they noticed anything else about that season. It was not loud, the way a warning might have been. It was the opposite, a held breath that the whole of Dobar seemed, without knowing why, to be holding along with her. The fishermen, so long accustomed to either her caution or her permission, found themselves hesitating at the water's edge in a way they hadn't since Ose's death over a decade before. They told themselves it was nothing, but more than one boat turned back to shore that week for no reason any of them could name aloud. "Why does the witch say nothing now?" Tunde asked in the market, though there was less mockery in his voice than there had been in years. "Has she finally run out of doom to promise us?" No one laughed with him this time, not even his own friends. 12 years is a long time to build a habit of being wrong about someone. Chief Baba Fowosanya, old now, sent his servant to Amara's hut 3 times that week. Each time, the servant returned with nothing but the same report. The stranger sits and watches the river and says nothing at all. It was Ifeoma in the end who understood first, because Ifeoma was the only person in Doba who had ever bothered to look at Amara as something other than a rumour with a face. She understood, watching the older woman those long, silent mornings, that Amara had not simply run out of warnings to give. Amara was afraid, not of what was coming, but of speaking it aloud to people who had spent 12 years deciding, before she opened her mouth, exactly how much her words were worth. "Why won't you tell them?" Ifeoma asked again, on the 7th morning of the silence, sitting now instead of simply delivering the water and leaving. "Even if they laugh, you've always told them, no matter how they treated you for it." Amara was quiet for a long moment, so long that Ifeoma began to think she would not answer at all. But then she spoke, and her voice, when it finally came, was softer than Ifeoma had ever heard it. "I have given this village the truth for 12 years, Amara said. And for 12 years they have told me, not with their words, but with everything else, that my truth was only ever worth their laughter. Their son's mockery in the market, their chief's secret servant, too proud to ask me himself. I have buried children I tried to save, and watched their mothers thank luck instead of me, because thanking me would have meant admitting whose voice they'd chosen to ignore." She looked finally directly at Ifeoma, the only person who had ever earned that look freely, without demanding it. "So now, let them keep the silence they always wanted from me. Let them finally learn what it costs to have it." Ifeoma did not fully understand, not that morning. She would only come to understand it fully many years later, but she remembered every word. 3 nights after that conversation, the sky over Dobar turned a colour the oldest elders swore they had never seen. Not orange, not grey, but something between the two that had no name in any language spoken in that village. The river, which had run low and lazy all season, fell suddenly, unnaturally still. The way water falls still only in the hour before it rises far beyond where anyone has built their homes to withstand it. And the birds, every bird, in every tree, all at once, went silent. It was Ifeoma who ran first to the hut by the baobab tree, not to ask Amara what was happening, but to tell her that she already knew. "You have to tell them," Ifoma said. "Whatever it costs you. Whatever they've cost you. Please." That night, for the first time in 12 years, Chief Baba Fawasanya himself walked the path to the hut by the baobab tree. He came alone, without his servant, without his son. He came the way a man comes when pride has finally, quietly, run out. He did not come to mock her. He came to ask. Amara looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the old chief later admitted to no one but Ifoma that he had never in his life felt so thoroughly seen. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not with anger, though she had earned the right to both. "The water is coming," she said. "Not the river rising slowly, the way you know it to rise, all at once, before dawn, higher than any flood this village has kept in memory. Move the grain stores to the high ground behind the baobab tonight. Move the children and the elders there now, before you sleep. Move everything else you can carry, and leave everything you cannot." The chief did not laugh. He did not ask her how she knew, though the question sat plainly on his face. He only nodded, once, and turned to do the only thing left that a proud man can do when pride has finally cost him enough. Dobar moved that night in a way it had never moved before. Grain stores were carried on backs and in carts to the high ground. Children were woken from sleep and led by torchlight, confused and half-dreaming, up the same path Ifeoma had run only hours before. The elders who could not walk were carried. Tunde, the chief's son, who had mocked Amara longer and louder than anyone in Doba, was among those who carried the old and the grain that night, working in a silence that had nothing left in it of laughter. The water came before dawn, exactly as Amara had said it would. Not the slow, familiar rising the fishermen had known their whole lives, but a sudden surge that swallowed the low fields, the riverside huts, and the market where Tunde had once called her a witch, all before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. By the time the water receded, 3 days later, Doba had lost homes. It had lost stores of grain that would make the coming months lean and difficult. It had lost, in some small way, the version of itself that had spent 12 years deciding a woman's warnings were worth less than her audience's comfort. But it had not lost a single life. Not one. Amara lived many more years in Doba after that season. She never became beloved, not in the way the storytellers who came after her liked to promise their listeners when they wanted a tidy ending. She became something rarer and, in its own way, heavier than beloved. She became believed. Not because the village finally understood her, but because they had finally been made to understand, at the cost of everything but their lives, what her voice had always been worth. Ifoma told this story for the rest of her life, to her own children and to children who were not hers at all. She told it not as a story about a flood, though the flood was the part everyone remembered first. She told it as a story about the 12 years before the flood, the years in which the truth arrived, again and again, in a voice the village had already decided not to trust. They say in Doba, even now, that the loudest warning a woman ever gave them was the day she said nothing at all. Some truths are not ignored because they are quiet. They are ignored because we decide, long before we ever hear them, whose voice is allowed to be truth. If you like the story, please subscribe to my channel for more bedtime and untold truth stories.